Gather around now, cubs, and listen to the story of Squirrely Day, or as I like to think of it, how Squirrely saved the forest. As you all know, Squirrely Day is the most important day in the forest, and it takes place every year on the day that the last leaf in the forest falls. But do you know the story of how Squirrely Day began? Well, let me tell you. Now, you might find it hard to believe, but our lovely forest was not always as peaceful and friendly as it is today. In fact, when I was a younger cub, it was not at all unusual to see animals bicker and even fight with one another. Let me tell you, it could have become a very dangerous place to live, had it not been for the actions of one clever little squirrel. Squirrely was not the type of creature you might typically expect to be a forest hero. You see, he was born with very short sight. In fact, he could hardly see his own paw stretched out in front of him. The forest was little more than a collection of blurs and shadows to him, so the rest of us only pitied Squirrely because he could never fully appreciate just how beautiful our forest home was, especially in autumn, when the leaves are falling and turn red and yellow. Oddly, Squirrely himself never complained, nor did he look for our pity. He was always much too busy for that. You see, because Squirrely's eyesight was so poor, he had to plan much more carefully and work much harder than any of the other forest creatures. And I know what you are thinking. Bats have very poor eyesight, and you never hear them complain. Now, that is true. Bats hate complainers, but they have super hearing to help them navigate. Also, bats can fly, and there are not so many tree stumps, rocks, and hills to crash into up in the sky. From a very young age, Squirrely had to learn the exact position of everything in the forest to make sure that he didn't whack his snout every time he left his treehouse. Importantly, knowing the layout of the forest meant that Squirrely could always find the best nuts and berries for dinner. Because of this, Squirrely always went about his business very happily. However, Squirrely did have one big problem. In winter, when the snow fell in a heavy blanket, it was impossible for him to find his paths through the forest. Of course, this would have been a disaster for any ordinary short-sighted squirrel. But Squirrely had a plan. Each autumn, when all of the other forest animals were playing hide and seek in the fallen leaves and going to their favorite swimming holes, Squirrely was busy scampering to and fro to his favorite trees and bushes to collect big piles of food, which he then stored in his treehouse. And while, yes, the others were having much more fun than Squirrely, he thought that it was a better idea to save his fun for the long winter, when he would be forced to stay indoors anyway because of the snow. Now, it did not go unnoticed by all of the other forest creatures. The Squirrely was always very happy. Some thought, what reason does that little squirrel have to be so happy? With such poor eyesight, he should be sad and gloomy all day. However, it was in the winter months that the others began to grow more curious about Squirrely. As I said, when I was a cub, the forest was not such a happy place to live, and the main reason for that was the long, hard winter. You see, back then, the animals were very unorganized. All summer and autumn, they would eat all the nuts, berries, roots, fruits, and leaves that they could fit in their bellies without ever worrying about supply. Of course, in those months, there was more than enough food for everyone, so things were always jolly. However, once winter came along, all of the trees lost their leaves, and snow and frost made the earth too hard for digging up. This meant that there was never enough food for everyone, and many went through the winter very hungry. On top of that, because there was so little food, the forest creatures had to travel further to get something to eat, and that, of course, made them very tired. Well, I don't know about you, but when I am very tired and hungry, I am not very happy. Now try to imagine living in a forest full of tired and hungry animals. Everyone was cranky. Mr. Fox would tell Mrs. Fox that her fur had lost its shine, and Mrs. Fox would tell Mr. Fox that his paws were stinky and his tail was balding. The mouse children, of whom there were many, could not go out to play because the snow was too deep, and so they drove their parents crazy, running around and around their burrow, breaking things, falling over, and painting on the walls. The biggest and most dangerous arguments, however, were those between the different animal families. The thrushes and the sparrows would fight to claim those trees with the hardiest seeds, and both would be easily chased off by the owls. And the deer and wild boars made a frightening racket, butting heads over the last few frozen acorns. It was all a terrible mess. But while all of this was going on, one happy and well-fed little creature, Squirrelly, would stroll through the forest, whistling and greeting everyone that he, literally, bumped into. This confused the others, and one day they decided to call a forest meeting to find out Squirrelly's secret. At the meeting, I asked Squirrelly how he remained so happy and well fed over the winter, while everyone else, myself included, was tired, hungry, and cranky. Well, he said, as you all know, I have trouble seeing faraway things. That means that I have to be far more organized than many of you. So, while you spend your autumn evenings strolling around, playing and visiting your favorite water holes, I gather all of the things that I need for the winter. All of the creatures leaned in to hear more. Squirrely continued, I know that it's very nice to enjoy yourself all summer and autumn without any cares, but by working a little bit more to store supplies for the winter, I'm happy and well fed over the winter too. The animals liked this idea very much, so I asked Squirrely, do you think that you could help all of us to be happy and well fed all year round? Of course, he replied cheerfully. All we need is a well organized plan. Squirrely picked up a stick and drew a map of the forest on the earth before him. On it, he was able to mark every food-bearing bush and tree in the forest from memory. Needless to say, all of the animals were astonished by this little creature. Now, said Squirrely, it is important that we gather those berries and nuts and seeds that we like best before the last leaf in the forest falls. Importantly, because there are many of us, we need to plan exactly who should have what. Squirrely went through each family one by one, showing the birds where to find seeds while being careful to send the thrushes to one side of the forest and the sparrows to the other. Similarly, Squirrely showed the wild boars where the juiciest mushrooms were located and the deer where the biggest acorn trees grew. By the end of the forest meeting, every family knew exactly when and where to find their winter supplies. Naturally, Squirrely was the hero of the forest, and though the animals were hungry that winter, they were happy because they all knew that it would be the last time. And sure enough, the next autumn, all of the forest creatures made sure to collect enough supplies for their families to last the winter. And though that meant a little less fun in the autumn, it made life much happier for everyone. So then, that is the story of how Squirrely saved the forest from ruin. And in return, all of the creatures decided to make the last day of autumn, the day the last leaf fell, Squirrely Day. They made it an opportunity to renew friendships, and they threw a big party to celebrate together before they all went off to their own homes for the winter. And it has been that way every year since.